The story goes that a father was left in charge of his infant child while his wife went shopping. It was the first time that he'd been left to care for the little guy and was at a complete loss to know what to do. When his wife returned, she went into the nursery to find the child wailing and her husband standing over the crib sweating. She knew instantly what the problem was from the stench in the air. Squeezing the diaper, she could tell that it had been filled several times. She asked her husband, "Why didn't you change the diaper?" He held up the bag of diapers, pointing to the words, "Good for up to 18 pounds." Raising children is a daunting challenge. It would be nice if babies came with a set of instructions for the next 18 years. And they do. This is the owner's manual for life, the manufacturer's handbook, if you will. God created us, and parenting, it's His idea. He's not left us without direction on how to raise our children. Really, the Bible is packed with parenting instructions, and we're going to see some of them in our study now. Now, this section of the Apostle Paul's letter to the Ephesian church, it begins at verse 18 of chapter 5, where he tells us to be filled with the Spirit. A result of that is given in verse 21, a mutual submission to one another that shifts our center from self to others. Paul then goes on in the rest of chapters 5 and into chapter 6, describing what that looks like in the various relationships that we have. In our last study, we saw that worked out in marriage. In this study, we're going to see it lived out in the home between children and parents. In the next study, we'll see how it's worked out in the workplace. And so we read in verse 1, chapter 6, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right." A child's first duty is obedience. But that word obey, it doesn't mean some kind of robotic, mindless compliance. The word literally means to listen under. And the idea is this. Let's say that you need a job and you see a sign in the window of a business that says "Help needed, will train." So you go in, you fill out the application, and they hire you on the spot. They tell you that you're going to start the next day. But they don't tell you what you're going to be doing. They know your qualifications because of the application and the interview, and so whatever it is, they must think that you can do it. Still, it would be nice to know what the job is. You're just happy to have employment, and so you head to work your first day. You're taken to a room and you're told to have a seat. Someone will be with you shortly. After a couple of minutes, a man enters and says that he's a manager and will train you in your new job. Now, listen, this word obey is the entire posture towards him. He's an authority whose responsibility is to see that you know what to do. You're eager to learn, so you listen carefully. You want to know not just what to do, but how and why. Children are to obey because parents have a responsibility that's given them by God that we'll see in just a bit. Paul sets the call to obedience in two quick notes. He says here first that it's in the Lord. No one of any age is required to obey a parent who demands that they sin. Any parent who coerces or manipulates a child into sin or some crime is going to face God's wrath. In Matthew chapter 18, verses 5 and 6, we find Jesus saying this, "Whoever receives one little child in my name receives me, but whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were drowned in the depth of the sea." Now, second, Paul says obeying parents is right. He appeals to natural law, the baseline morality societies and cultures have held throughout history. A parent's duty is to raise a child. The child's duty is to be raised by obeying. The loss of that basic rule is a sign of decadence and cultural decay. In Romans chapter 1, verse 30, Paul says one of the marks of a society that God has given over to a depraved mind is when disobedience to parents is the rule rather than the exception. In 2 Timothy chapter 3, we're told that the last days will see a wholesale embrace of evil, and evidence of which is acceptance of youthful rebellion. Modern parenting, based on secular psychology, urges moms and dads to be their child's friend, not an authority figure. But God made parents the authorities in a child's life. It's not up to them to adopt a different role. Mom and dad, your child must learn to obey because it doesn't come naturally. If they don't learn it as children, the rebellion that's natural to them as fallen souls will grow and eventually become deadly as I think we're now witnessing abroad in Western society. God assigns parents authority so children learn to submit to a visible authority. As they mature, they'll learn to submit to the unseen authority of God. Really, parents are God's agents to train a child into what's good and right. While a child's first duty is to obey, the second is to honor. In verse 2, Paul quotes the fifth commandment when he says, "Honor your father and mother," which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth. Honor is the foundation of all healthy relationships. And the place that we learn to honor is at home with our parents. God calls children to honor them. It's a command. Take note of that because it's important. You see, we hear people talk a lot about being honorable and earning respect. It's a worthwhile ambition. But in Scripture, honor isn't earned, it's owed. God places a debt of honor on us. We owe it to those that He puts in authority with us. Children owe honor to mom and dad. As with obedience, while this is addressed to children, it's parents who teach it. How parents teach obedience and honor is spelled out a little bit later. But for now, note how Paul highlights the promise attached to the fifth commandment. He says, "Honor your father and mother," which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth. When honor is actively given those that God has placed as our authorities, society as a whole is blessed. Crime and poverty decline. The standard of living rises, as does life expectancy. It all begins at home with parents teaching their children to honor and obey. Verse 4, "And you, fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord." The church in Ephesus was made up mostly of Gentiles who'd come to faith in Jesus. There was a lot of stuff from the Greco-Roman society that they were raised in they had to unlearn, and part of that was the role of men in parenting. You see, the attitude of the typical Gentile man was that children were an inconvenient bother. When I was growing up, there was a saying that was quite common: children should be seen but not heard. In Ephesus, it was probably children ought not even be seen. You see, raising children was regarded as a mother's job until they reach adulthood, and then dad might show a little bit of interest. Interesting that as we read stories and tales from ancient Greeks and Romans, inordinately rare are those that relate a warm relationship between a father and a child. There just aren't great father-son stories that come to us from that time. And the reason is obvious. Greco-Roman fathers weren't dads. They provided some genetic material that fertilized an egg, but that was about all that they were concerned with. My work here is done, was the attitude. Listen, I'm sure there were exceptions with some Ephesian fathers who were good parents and took a hand in raising their children. The point is, they were by far the exception to the rule. Though raising children in the training and admonition of the Lord seems, like basic parenting to us, it is so because of what Paul says here and the impact it ends up having on people's understanding of godly parenting as Christianity then begins to influence Western civilization. Just as we saw in the last study where Paul tells husbands to love their wives, and we say, well, of course, but only because Paul penned that. By and large, men in the Greco-Roman culture of the first century did not sacrificially love their wives, and they didn't until a critical mass of them got saved and began to heed Paul's instruction to husbands. Paul points dads at taking an active role in raising their children precisely because they weren't. Rather than being a cold, indifferent tyrant who frustrated his children, turning them into angry enemies, fathers needed to become dads who took an active and positive role in raising them. He's to partner with his wife in the task of parenting. Now, God's mandate to parents is, as it says here, bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. That phrase, bring them up, means to nourish them into maturity. It's a word with lots of time in it. It's coming alongside, providing whatever's needed until they can stand on their own. Now, anyone who's ever taught a child to ride a bike has an idea of what this means. Parents don't just provide nourishment for their children's bodies in the form of food. They're to nourish their soul and their spirit with love and truth. Another illustration. Let's say you plant a tree, a sapling in the yard. Because it's fragile with no roots, you put a thick post next to it and you secure it with a strap. When the wind blows, that little sapling is secure because of the post providing its strength. As it grows, it sends down roots and gets stronger. But it's not strong enough to endure the winter storms on its own. So you loosen the strap a bit so that when the winds blow, the roots are tested and they adapt to the challenge. Stronger roots mean more growth above ground, till eventually the tree is strong enough to stand against the storm on its own, and you remove the post altogether. Modern parenting has it exactly backwards. Parents are told to not direct young children. The current fashion is to give young ones lots of freedom, but then as they get older without having learned any self-control or self-discipline, poor choices produce increasingly troublesome consequences. In an attempt to rein in disaster, parents start applying more and more control, which only moves undisciplined youth into greater expressions of rebellion with even more severe consequences. For some of these youths, the result is the ultimate confinement of a jail or prison cell. Biblical parenting is more direction at the start so that less is needed later as they learn how to live. Mom and dad, parenting is a sacred commission. It's a holy task. You've been given a precious gift, a human being created in the image of God for His glory. That child is so precious to God, Jesus died for him or her. Paul gives an important insight in how to raise children when he says that we are to bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. Admonition and training go together, hand in hand. Admonition is verbal instruction. Training is demonstration and application. We need to make sure that we're communicating with our children. Be sure that you've explained what's expected. Don't assume that they know something because it's common sense. How much common sense does a 3-year-old have? They prove time and again, not much. Mom and dad, don't assume that just because you've talked, they've heard or understood. Ask if they've understood. Have them repeat it back to you. If after telling them what to do, they ask why, don't reply, because I said so. When they ask why, that's an invitation to explain right and wrong, wisdom and foolishness, the path of life versus the road to ruin. Giving the why is what builds a child's respect for your role as parent because they realize that you've tapped into some realm of knowledge and experience that's not theirs yet, but you want them to enter it as well. The main way that parents can sidestep the wrath that Paul tells them to avoid is by making sure they practice what they preach. That's the training that he's speaking of. It's being a good example. It's living out the things we tell our children to do. And then, when our children obey, we praise and we affirm them. When they fail, we correct them. As I said, the call to admonish and train means investing time and effort. And it's why Paul addresses this to fathers. Pagans simply didn't do it, but Christians must. If we're to train our children to be men and women of God, we have to invest time with them, showing them how to live. When I was a young dad, reading and listening to the experts on how to parent, I heard a lot about quality time versus quantity time. They said that quality time was more important than quantity. They said that you might not be able to spend much time with your kids, but make sure that the time that you did have with them was well used. It didn't take long before other experts realized the fiction of quality time when it comes to parenting. It turns out what children need is time, lots of it. In parenting, quality is quantity. Time needs to be spent together, talking, sharing, playing, working. Family life is done life on life. So turn off the tube one night a week. Ditch the phone and the tablet for an hour. Go for a walk together. Play a board game. Read a chapter of the Bible and talk about it. Pray together. Here's a great idea. Read a classic novel together. Instead of having someone else's imagination cast onto a 72-inch high-definition monitor, activate your child's imaginations by reading a great story together. If you get a chance, I want to encourage you to look up a song video on YouTube called Cats in the Cradle by Harry Chapin. Give it a listen. There's a link to it in the description below.